Carl Jung's final warning to empaths was terrifying. They're feeding on your light, and most of you don't even realize it's happening. In his private notes, Jung documented a psychological phenomenon so disturbing that he hesitated to publish it. He observed that empaths, people with extraordinary emotional sensitivity, were being systematically drained by what I call unconscious energy parasites. These weren't obvious predators. They were often charming, wounded people who seemed to desperately need healing. But Jung discovered something chilling. They had unconsciously learned to survive by feeding on the spiritual energy of others, particularly empaths whose light burned brightest. The most terrifying part is that the feeding process is invisible. It happens through emotional manipulation disguised as connection, through trauma bonds mistaken for deep love, through the empath's own compassionate nature being weaponized against them. Jung realized that empaths weren't just attracting difficult people by coincidence. They were being actively hunted by those whose inner light had been extinguished and who could only survive by consuming the light of others. Join me as we descend into the shadow realm of human psychology to expose these invisible predators, learn to recognize their feeding mechanisms before they strike, and discover Jung's forbidden method for transforming from prey into sovereign, without losing the gift that makes you extraordinary. Because here's what Jung discovered that modern psychology still refuses to acknowledge. Empaths aren't born broken. They're forged in childhood trauma to become perfect hosts for emotional parasites. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But he discovered something darker in his clinical work. When an empath meets an energy parasite, only one person gets transformed, and it's never the parasite. From an evolutionary perspective, empaths develop their supernatural sensitivity as a survival mechanism. The child who could read every microexpression, anticipate every mood shift, and absorb every unspoken emotion was the child who survived chaotic households. But here's the tragic irony. That same survival mechanism that saved you as a child now makes you a beacon for adult predators who have learned to weaponize your gift against you. Dr. Judith Orloff's research confirms what Jung observed. Empaths' mirror neurons fire more intensely than average people. Your brain literally absorbs the emotions of others as if they were your own. But what Jung realized, and what most therapists miss, is that some people have learned to exploit this neurological difference. They don't just accidentally trigger your empathy. They strategically activate it. They've unconsciously mastered the art of emotional manipulation that feels like connection, trauma bonding that masquerades as deep love, and energy extraction that you mistake for intimacy. If you've ever felt completely drained after being with certain people, but couldn't explain why, remember this: they were feeding on your light. Jung called this dynamic shadow projection reversal. The energy parasite doesn't just take your light. They convince you that giving it away is your purpose. Jung observed this repeatedly in his practice. He wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But in the case of empaths and energy parasites, the dynamic is reversed. The parasite projects their emptiness onto the empath, convincing them that feeling drained is normal, that exhaustion equals love, that depletion means devotion. Think about the last time you felt completely drained after being with someone. Your body probably gave you clear signals: sudden fatigue, emotional overwhelm, physical tension, or brain fog. But instead of listening to these warnings, you probably told yourself you were being too sensitive or overthinking things. This is exactly what the energy parasite needs you to believe. Jung called this the gaslight of the unconscious. When someone's shadow convinces your consciousness that your intuition is the problem. Here's how the feeding process works. Stage 1, the light recognition. Energy parasites are unconsciously drawn to empaths like moths to flame. They can sense your emotional availability from across a room. Jung noted that narcissistic personalities have an uncanny ability to identify empaths immediately. They recognize the glow of someone who gives more than they take, who feels deeply, who carries emotional responsibility for others. Stage 2, the wound display. The parasite doesn't approach with demands. They approach with pain. They share their trauma, struggles, and deep emotions. They mirror your depth while hiding their emptiness. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But energy parasites have learned to become who you need them to be. Stage 3. The empathy activation. Once they've hooked your compassion, they begin the systematic extraction. They create crisis after crisis that requires your emotional labor. They trauma dump without reciprocation. They make you feel special for understanding them when others couldn't. Jung observed that empaths mistake being needed for being loved. Stage 4. The depletion normalization. This is the most insidious stage. The parasite convinces you that feeling drained is proof of how deep your connection is. That exhaustion equals love. That emotional overwhelm means you're a highly sensitive person rather than someone being systematically depleted. Jung didn't see this as mere interpersonal dysfunction, but as an archetypal pattern. The wounded healer meets the shadow devourer. He wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." For empaths, this means accepting that your compassion can be weaponized, your gift can become your prison, and your light can be consumed if you don't learn to protect it. The empath's shadow isn't cruelty, it's the unconscious need to be needed, the addiction to fixing others, because being useful feels safer than being seen. The terror of abandonment so deep that you'll accept emotional vampirism rather than risk being alone. Energy parasites aren't evil people consciously plotting your destruction. They're unconscious beings driven by what Jung called the shadow's hunger for wholeness. They sense in you what they've exiled in themselves: genuine feeling, authentic connection, and emotional depth. Instead of reclaiming these qualities through inner work, they steal them from others. They feed on your emotional energy because they've cut themselves off from their own. They bask in your light because they've extinguished their inner flame. This creates what I call the psychological vampire effect. The more energy you give them, the more they need. The more you try to heal them, the more wounded they become. The more light you share, the darker their shadow grows. This isn't because they're evil. It's because they're psychologically incomplete. They've disowned their capacity for genuine emotion, so they must consume it externally, like a person with no digestive system who must keep eating but can never feel satisfied. This puts empaths in an impossible choice. Your compassionate nature wants to help, heal, and save them from their darkness. But Jung discovered you cannot heal someone by letting them feed on your essence. You cannot love someone back to wholeness by allowing them to drain your light. And you cannot save someone who's unconsciously committed to staying lost. This pattern shows up everywhere. Romantic partners who use trauma to hook your empathy, family members who guilt you into emotional servitude, coworkers who monopolize your energy. The shadow side of empathy is the belief that you don't matter unless you're useful, that love must be earned through service, that your value lies in your ability to absorb others' pain. This belief makes you the perfect host. Jung's solution was individuation, becoming who you truly are. He believed your light isn't meant to be consumed. It's meant to illuminate your own path toward wholeness. The light method he proposed teaches empaths to discern energy signatures, integrate their shadow, guard sacred energy, honor their authentic nature, and transform trauma into wisdom. He warned that when you begin protecting your light, energy parasites will escalate. They'll create bigger crises, threaten suicide, or accuse you of being selfish. This is what Jung called the extinction burst of the shadow. It feels cruel, but signals that your boundaries are working. True friends will respect your boundaries. Parasites will try to shame or guilt you back. Jung understood this battle was spiritual. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Protecting your energy is a war for your soul. Consciousness is the ultimate weapon. Once you awaken, you can no longer be manipulated, drained, or controlled. You become a catalyst rather than a source to be consumed. But awakening requires courage. The courage to be disliked, lose relationships, and stand alone rather than sacrifice yourself for false connection. Jung identified 3 levels of empath development. Unconscious empaths, who absorb emotions without control. Conscious empaths, who recognize and begin protecting their gifts. And sovereign empaths, who have integrated their shadow and use empathy as discernment, not compulsion. This transformation requires disappointing others, but once you awaken, you can't go back. You can't unsee the feeding patterns or return to emotional slavery. Some will respond by building walls, becoming cynical, or mistaking coldness for strength. The goal isn't to stop feeling, it's to feel consciously. Jung's final warning was that your light is not fuel for others' darkness, but illumination for your own path. Energy parasites aren't monsters, they're unconscious. The solution isn't to heal them, but to outgrow your need to be needed. When you stop letting others feed on your energy, you amplify your light. You attract those who appreciate it without consuming it, who match it without dimming it. Master this, and you'll never again confuse being drained with being loved, being needed with being valued, or being depleted with being devoted. Jung's message is clear. They're feeding on your light, but you have the power to stop them. Jung saw something in his patients that psychology still refuses to face. Some people aren't just draining, they're devouring, they're charming, vulnerable, magnetic, and yet, behind their smile lies a hunger so deep, they survive only by consuming your energy. If you've ever left a conversation feeling hollow, heavy, or suddenly exhausted, Jung would tell you this isn't coincidence. It's extraction. You've just been fed upon. Empaths are forged in fire. You weren't born with this sensitivity. You were trained as a child. You learned to read danger in micro-expressions, to anticipate pain before it came, to carry the emotions of others so you could survive chaos. That gift saved you, but in adulthood, it's a beacon, a signal predators can't resist. Jung called them unconscious energy parasites. They aren't cartoon villains. They're broken souls, cut off from their own inner light, forced to take yours. And the scariest part, they don't even know they're doing it. They come to you with stories of pain, trauma, heartbreak. They don't demand, they bleed. And your heart opens because that's who you are. But this is how the feeding begins. One crisis becomes two. One confession becomes an endless spiral of emotional dumping. Before you know it, you're drained, exhausted, and questioning your own sanity. Jung named this pattern shadow projection reversal. They project their emptiness onto you, convincing you that giving yourself away is proof of love. Think of the people in your life who leave you feeling tired, anxious, or guilty after every interaction. They don't just need you, they're feeding on you. And you've been trained to believe this is compassion, that this is your role, that this is love. Jung saw this in his patients again and again. The empath's shadow isn't cruelty, it's compulsion. You're addicted to being needed because it feels safer than being seen. You sacrifice yourself because somewhere deep down, you were taught that love must be earned with pain. But here's the truth Jung wanted every empath to know. Your light is not fuel for other people's darkness. Your empathy is not a currency to buy love. And you are not obligated to bleed so others can feel whole. He believed the key to freedom was individuation, integrating your shadow, reclaiming your power, and learning to protect your energy like your life depends on it. Because it does. The moment you start guarding your light, predators panic, they escalate. They'll guilt you, shame you, call you selfish. This is what Jung called the extinction burst of the shadow, the desperate flailing of someone losing their supply. And if you can survive that storm, you become untouchable. You stop attracting predators and start repelling them. Your empathy becomes strength, not a weakness to be exploited. Jung's final warning is this: energy parasites are not evil, they are unconscious. But your survival doesn't depend on healing them. It depends on healing yourself. When you no longer need to be needed, you step into sovereignty. You stop mistaking exhaustion for intimacy. You stop confusing sacrifice with love. And you finally see your gift for what it is. Not a burden, not a curse, but a light that was always meant to guide you, not drain you. Jung believed that once you learn to see energy parasites clearly, they lose their power over you. The danger has always been their invisibility. They don't look like predators. They look like your partner, your friend, your parent, even your boss. They hide behind stories of pain, charming smiles, and emotional intimacy so convincing it feels sacred. But beneath the surface, their actions betray them. If you want to reclaim your energy, you need to know these signs. The first red flag is emotional whiplash. One moment they're warm, loving, and deeply vulnerable. The next, they're cold, distant, or angry. Jung called this the pendulum of unconscious projection. It keeps you hooked, confused, and desperate to restore harmony. You start working harder to please them, not realizing you're being trained to give more and more of yourself. The second sign is the endless crisis cycle. Energy parasites thrive on chaos because chaos keeps you emotionally invested. There's always something wrong, an argument, a disaster, a tragedy, real or exaggerated. They make you feel like only you can help them, and every time you try, they sink their hooks deeper. This cycle isn't random, it's survival for them. Then comes guilt manipulation. Parasites rarely demand outright. Instead, they frame your boundaries as betrayal. They'll say things like, "I thought you cared about me," or "You're all I have." Jung observed that empaths, conditioned to equate love with sacrifice, crumble under guilt. This is how the feeding continues without resistance. The fourth sign is energy inversion. Pay attention to how you feel after spending time with them. Healthy relationships recharge you. With a parasite, you feel drained, heavy, or anxious, even if nothing dramatic happened. This is your body's warning system, what Jung called somatic intuition, but many empaths ignore it, blaming themselves for being too sensitive. The final and most subtle sign is mirroring without depth. At first, they seem perfect for you, your twin flame, your soulmate, your dream friend. They mirror your beliefs, your values, your dreams. But Jung noted that this mirroring is often a survival tactic, not authenticity. They reflect you so well because they have no stable sense of self. What feels like destiny is actually a disguise. Once you start recognizing these patterns, something remarkable happens. You stop blaming yourself, you see the game clearly, and the illusion begins to break. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Every empath who has ever asked, "Why do I always attract toxic people?" is really asking, "Why am I unconscious of my own light?" Spotting these signs is not about paranoia, it's about empowerment. Jung didn't want empaths to become hardened or bitter, he wanted them awake. Because when you see the pattern, you stop playing the role. You stop feeding predators who don't even know they're predators. And this is where the true transformation begins.